2 days before my graduation, my mother called me with news that knocked the air out of my chest. "I'm not coming to your ceremony. Your brother says it would take away from his engagement party." My father backed her up, telling me to just walk across that stage alone, that it wasn't a big deal. On the morning of my graduation, I didn't walk alone. When I crossed that stage and the audience saw who was standing up clapping louder than anyone else, the whole auditorium turned to look. My mother, sitting near the back in her good church dress, went stiff as a board. Before I get into it, let me just say I'm 26 years old, and growing up in Charlotte meant my family was the kind that smiled wide in family photos and fought ugly behind closed doors. My father ran a chain of dental practices across the Carolinas, and my mother spent her time chairing the women's auxiliary at our church and hosting dinner parties where the centerpieces cost more than my monthly grocery budget. From the outside, we looked like the family everyone wanted to be. From the inside, I was the kid who got left out of the family portrait if I wasn't dressed exactly right. My older brother Holden was the one who mattered. He always had been. When he proposed to his girlfriend with a ring my father picked out personally, my parents threw an engagement party so big the local paper wrote about it. I was the quiet daughter who'd gone off to college on scholarships and loans because my parents said a state school education built character. I never asked them for money after that. I learned early that asking just gave them another reason to remind me where I stood. It was 2 days before my pharmacy school graduation. I'd worked through 4 brutal years to get there, nights at the hospital pharmacy counting pills until my eyes blurred, weekends studying instead of sleeping. I was standing in my tiny apartment kitchen in Durham, ironing the blouse I planned to wear under my graduation gown when my phone rang. My mother's name lit up the screen. I picked it up smiling, expecting her to ask what times the ceremony started so she could plan her drive. Instead, her voice came through flat and impatient, like I was interrupting something far more important. "Sweetheart, we have a situation. No hello, no warmth. Your father and I won't be able to make it to your graduation." I actually laughed, thinking it had to be a joke, or maybe an emergency with a patient at one of the practices. "What do you mean you won't make it?" "Mom, this is graduation. I've been telling you the date for 8 months. Holden's engagement party got moved up," she said, like that explained anything. "Brittany's parents could only do that weekend, and you know how important this is for him. We can't be splitting our attention between 2 events on the same day. It would be disrespectful to the Whitfields." I stood there gripping the iron, the steam hissing into the silence. "It's my graduation, Mom, from pharmacy school. You said you'd be there." "Don't be dramatic," she said. "You'll have your little ceremony, you'll get your diploma in the mail either way. This party is a once-in-a-lifetime thing for your brother. You can understand that, can't you?" But I'd spent 26 years learning that arguing with my mother was like arguing with a wall that occasionally threw insults back at you. My father got on the line a minute later, his voice carrying that same clipped, dismissive tone he used with patients who complained about billing. "Just walk across that stage like everyone else, Brynn. Hundreds of people do it without their parents watching. It's not a big deal." That was the moment something in me went very quiet and very still. Not a big deal. 4 years of my life, the nights I'd cried over organic chemistry, the loans I was going to be paying off until I was 40, the patients I'd already started counseling during my rotations who called me by name and trusted me with their medications, none of it was a big deal, because it wasn't happening under the same roof as my brother's engagement party. I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat down on my kitchen floor, still holding the blouse, and I let myself cry exactly once, hard and ugly, for about 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face and called the one person I knew would actually show up. His name was Easton. We'd met 2 years earlier when he came into the hospital pharmacy to pick up his grandmother's prescriptions every week. Always patient, always asking how my day was going instead of just grabbing the bag and leaving. We weren't dating, not exactly. We'd had dinner a handful of times, gone for walks along the river, talked on the phone some nights until one of us fell asleep mid-sentence. He was finishing his residency in emergency medicine, which meant his schedule was a disaster, but he always made time when it mattered. I'd told him about my family in pieces over those 2 years, the way you reveal an old scar a little at a time, watching to see if the person flinches. Easton never flinched. He just got quieter and more careful with me, like he understood there were places that still hurt. When I called him crying, he didn't ask a single question before saying, "I'll be there. Front row if I have to fight someone for this seat." "You don't have to do that," I said, even though I desperately wanted him to. "Brynn, I'm asking what time the ceremony starts." I told him 11 a.m. Saturday at the convention center downtown. He said he'd already requested the day off 3 weeks ago just in case, because he had a feeling my parents would pull something. That should have told me everything about which people in my life actually paid attention. The 2 days leading up to graduation were strange, suspended in a kind of numb quiet. My roommate Aubrey kept trying to get me to talk about it, and I kept changing the subject. Because if I let myself sit in the anger for too long, I was scared I'd do something I'd regret. Like calling my mother back and saying every true and ugly thing I'd swallowed for 2.5 decades. Instead, I focused on logistics, picking up my cap and gown, making sure my heels weren't too tall to walk in, printing out the extra tickets nobody in my family wanted. I had 4 tickets. My parents weren't using theirs, obviously. I gave one to Easton, one to Aubrey, and I sat there staring at the last one for a long time before I texted my Aunt Roz, my father's younger sister, the one relative who'd always treated me like an actual person instead of a disappointment standing next to her golden son. Aunt Roz had moved to Raleigh 15 years ago after a falling out with my father over money he'd borrowed and never paid back, and the family had quietly stopped inviting her to things. I hadn't talked to her in almost a year, but I still had her number. Aunt Roz, I texted, I know this is out of nowhere, but I'm graduating from pharmacy school Saturday, and my parents aren't coming because of Holden's engagement party. Would you want my extra ticket? She called me within 2 minutes, and when I told her the whole story, I could hear her getting angrier on my behalf than I'd let myself get on my own behalf. I will absolutely be there, she said. And Brynn, baby, I'm bringing my good camera. Somebody in this family is going to document this properly. Saturday morning, I got dressed alone in my apartment, the navy blue gown hanging stiff and unfamiliar on my shoulders, the gold cords for graduating with honors looped around my neck. I looked at myself in the mirror and felt a strange mix of pride and grief, the kind where you've accomplished something enormous, and the people who were supposed to be proudest of you have already moved on to the next thing. The convention center was loud and bright, families packed into rows of folding chairs, balloons and flowers everywhere, the particular electric energy of hundreds of young people about to walk across a stage and become whatever they'd spent years training to be. I found my row, my heart pounding, scanning the crowd out of some old reflex even though I already knew my parents weren't coming. Easton was already there when I came out from backstage to find my seat among the graduates, dressed sharp in a navy suit, holding a bouquet of white peonies, my favorite, which he must have remembered from some offhand comment I'd made a year ago. Aubrey sat next to him snapping pictures on her phone. And then I saw her, Aunt Roz, 3 rows back in a bright yellow dress, already crying before the ceremony had even started, her camera ready around her neck. The dean started calling names. I sat in that sea of navy gowns, my stomach in knots, watching graduate after graduate cross the stage to applause from their families, trying not to think about the empty seats where my parents should have been. And then, with about 40 names left before mine, the doors at the back of the auditorium opened. I didn't see it happen. I was facing forward, watching the stage, but I heard the murmur ripple through the crowd, the way a room shifts when something unexpected walks in. Aubrey grabbed my arm later and told me what she'd seen. My mother and father, dressed in their Sunday best, walking in late, scanning the rows for seats, clearly expecting to slip in quietly and watch their other daughter graduate like nothing had happened. What they hadn't accounted for was Holden. It turned out Brittany's parents had pushed the engagement party back another 2 hours that very morning because the caterer had a delivery issue, and suddenly my parents had a window of time and a guilty conscience, or maybe just an awareness that skipping their daughter's graduate degree ceremony might not look great if anyone from their church circle ever found out. So they'd rushed over, expecting an easy entrance. They got seats near the back, 4 rows behind Aunt Roz, and from what Aubrey told me, my mother's face went through several emotions in quick succession when she spotted Aunt Roz sitting there with her camera. Surprise, then irritation, then something that looked almost like shame, gone as fast as it appeared. My name got called, Brynn Whitlock, Doctor of Pharmacy, graduating with highest honors. I walked across that stage with my chin up, and as I reached the dean to shake his hand and take my diploma, I heard it. A single voice, clear and unrestrained, rising above the polite applause. That's my girl. Let's go, Brynn. It was Easton, on his feet, clapping so hard and shouting so loud that half the auditorium turned to look at him and laughed, delighted, the way crowds do when somebody's joy is too big to contain. Aunt Roz was up too, snapping photo after photo, and Aubrey was filming the whole thing on her phone, grinning. I found my mother's face in the crowd as I crossed back toward my seat, diploma in hand. She was sitting rigid, hands folded in her lap, staring at the spectacle Easton and Aunt Roz had made, her mouth a tight line. My father wouldn't even look at me directly. He kept his eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder, like if he didn't make eye contact, he could pretend he'd been there the whole time. After the ceremony ended, the lobby filled with hugging families and flowers and the popping of phone cameras. I was standing with Easton and Aubrey and Aunt Roz, laughing for the first time in days, when I saw my parents approaching through the crowd. My mother had clearly rehearsed something on the drive over because she came at me with a tight, practiced smile. There she is. Congratulations, sweetheart, we made it after all, didn't we? I didn't say anything for a second, just looked at her. You made it for the photo opportunity, I said. You missed the actual ceremony. You missed my name being called. You weren't here when it mattered. Her smile faltered. Don't be ungrateful. We rearranged our entire day to be here. You didn't rearrange anything, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. Brittany's caterer rearranged your day for you. If that delivery hadn't been late, you'd still be at the party right now, and I'd still be over here with the only people who actually chose to show up for me. My father stepped in then, his jaw tight. Watch your tone. We're your parents. You're my parents, I agreed. That's exactly the problem. Parents are supposed to be the people who show up first, not the people who show up because their schedule freed up. Aunt Roz drove an hour and a half with 2 days' notice. Easton requested this day off 3 weeks ago because he had a feeling you'd do exactly this. You've had 8 months. My mother's eyes flicked to Aunt Roz, who was standing there with her arms crossed, not bothering to hide the satisfaction on her face. I see you've been keeping company with people who like to stir up family drama, my mother said coldly. I called my aunt, I said, because I needed someone in my corner, and you'd already told me that wasn't going to be you. That's not drama. That's just what happens when you make your choice clear enough. There was a long silence. People moved around us, families laughing and posing for photos, completely unaware of the standoff happening in the middle of the lobby. My father finally spoke, quieter now, something almost like discomfort crossing his face. We'll make it up to you. We'll take you to a nice dinner this week, just the 3 of us. I don't want a consolation dinner, I said. I want you to understand that you can't treat me like an afterthought my whole life and then expect a clean slate every time it's convenient for you. I'm not going to keep doing that math where I forgive everything because you eventually showed up late and apologized later. My mother's composure finally cracked, just slightly, her chin trembling. We came back for you, Brynn. You came back for yourselves, I said. So you wouldn't have to explain to the church ladies why you missed your daughter's doctorate. That's not the same thing as coming back for me. I turned and walked back to Easton, who slid his arm around my shoulders without a word, and Aunt Roz, who squeezed my hand hard, and Aubrey, who was already pulling up a restaurant on her phone to book us a table to celebrate properly. We left my parents standing in that lobby, and I didn't look back to see their faces. The weeks after graduation were strange in the best way. I moved into a new apartment closer to the hospital, where I'd accepted a clinical pharmacist position, the job I'd been chasing through every brutal rotation. Easton and I started actually dating, no more careful half steps, just 2 people who'd already proven to each other what showing up looked like. Aunt Roz came to my housewarming and brought a framed copy of one of her graduation photos, me mid-stride across that stage, diploma in hand, grinning so wide you could see exactly how proud I was of myself, parents or no parents. My mother called twice over the following month, leaving voicemails that danced around an apology without ever quite landing on one. My father didn't call at all, which somehow hurt less than I expected, because at least it was honest. I let the calls sit. I wasn't punishing them, not exactly. I just finally understood that I didn't owe anyone a relationship they hadn't bothered to earn. Then, almost 2 months later, I got a call from Holden himself, which was rare enough that I almost didn't answer. His engagement to Brittany had fallen apart spectacularly. It turned out the Whitfield family fortune everyone had been so impressed by was mostly debt dressed up in good tailoring, and once Brittany's parents realized my father had been quietly loaning them money to keep up appearances for the wedding planning, the whole arrangement collapsed under its own weight. My father had sunk nearly $60,000 into wedding deposits and bridging loans for people who, it turned out, had no intention of paying anything back. Mom and Dad are losing it, Holden told me, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Dad's talking about a second mortgage on the house. I don't know what to do. I felt something complicated listening to him, Not quite satisfaction, but not sympathy either, just a kind of clarity. I'm sorry that's happening to you, I said, and I meant it because Holden had never been cruel to me directly, just oblivious, raised inside a system that always told him he came first. But I don't think there's anything I can do about Dad's finances. They keep saying how proud they are of you, Holden said quietly. How you've got it together, a real job, a good guy. I think they're realizing they bet on the wrong kid. I didn't say anything triumphant. I just told him I hoped things worked out, that I'd always be his sister even if I wasn't going to be folded back into being everyone's afterthought. I hung up and sat on my new balcony with Easton, who'd heard enough of the conversation to guess what it was about, and he didn't say anything either, just reached over and laced his fingers through mine. My parents reached out again a few weeks after that, this time in person, showing up at the hospital pharmacy where I worked, looking smaller than I remembered, the confidence drained out of both of them. My mother's eyes were red. She didn't ask for money, didn't ask for anything specific, just stood there and said, "We were wrong." About the graduation. About a lot of things, probably, if we're being honest with ourselves. I took my break and sat with them for 20 minutes in the hospital cafeteria, the longest real conversation I think the three of us had ever had. I didn't promise them anything. I told them I was open to rebuilding something, slowly, on different terms than before, terms where I wasn't an afterthought, where showing up wasn't conditional on whether something better hadn't come along. My mother cried. My father, for the first time in my life, apologized without immediately following it with an excuse. It's been almost a year now. Things with my parents are better, not perfect but better, built on something steadier than the old performance of family we used to put on for other people's benefit. Easton and I got engaged in the spring, and when I told my mother, the first thing she asked was what date we were thinking, so she could make sure nothing else got scheduled that weekend. It was a small thing, but I noticed it, the way you notice the first sign of spring after a long winter. I think about that day a lot, the empty seats where my parents should have been, and how it taught me something I probably needed to learn anyway. That love that only shows up when it's convenient isn't really love, it's just good timing dressed up to look like it. The people who matter are the ones who show up before they know if it's going to be worth it. Easton showed up, Aunt Roz showed up, and somewhere in that auditorium, walking across that stage, to a single loud, unstoppable voice cheering me on, I finally showed up for myself too.